could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hi everybody, welcome back. This is Steve Marinucci, your Beatles news and music reporter, with a new episode of your Beatles News Briefs podcast. And I think we have a really good one for you today, with two great guests, distinguished author Jude Southerland Kessler and Mr. Jack Hirshhorn. Jude is the author of the John Lennon Series of books chronicling his life, the latest of which is Some Forever, Shades of Life, Volume 2, which begins with the Beatles' 1965 concert at Shea Stadium. We'll talk about that monumental Beatles year of 1965 and all that was happening to John Lennon. And then we'll have what we're calling Beatles in Canada Part 3. We hope you heard the first two segments in this series. The first one was Piers Hemmingson talking about the history of the Beatles in Canada, and also John Brower talking about the '69 Toronto Rock and Roll Revival concert. The second one was the one where we talked with Rob Frith, owner of Neptune Records, recording engineer Larry Hennessy, and their friend Doug Schober about the recently surfaced Beatles Decca tapes reel. And we'll continue that discussion this time with Jack Hirshhorn, who is the fourth person in the story of that Decca tapes reel. If you were to put these guys chronologically, Hirshhorn is actually the first person in the story because he was the first person to have the tape. He had it before Rob Frith, Larry Hennessy, and Doug Schober. We'll discuss with him how he came into possession of the tape and what he thought of it. He was a very charming guy with some interesting music connections. And then before we go, we'll also mention a news story that caught a lot of attention. But first, here's distinguished author Jude Southerland Kessler, who's here to talk about the latest book in her John Lennon series. This is titled Some Forever, Shades of Life, Volume 2. We talk about the year 1965, which is the focus of the book, and some of what was going on with the Beatles and with John Lennon specifically. You can order this book or any of her books on www.johnlennonseries.com. Here's my talk with Jude Southerland Kessler. I'm talking with Jude Southerland Kessler. How you doing, Jude?
I'm doing great, Steve.
Let's start talking about the new book. This is number 6, correct?
My editor, Janet Davis, who is the editor for Octopus Garden fanzine and has done a bunch of other books, will absolutely kill me if I call it 6 because 5.1, it is the second half of Volume 5. Volume 5, there was so much going on in 1965 that it was going to take me 6 years to write it, and it was going to be about 1,800 pages long. And so I said to my friend Lena Stagg, I said, Lena, what do you think if I just divide it in half and go ahead and let people read part 1, which will take them up to the first day of the 1965 North American tour, and I give them, in 3 years, the other half, which will be the 65 tour, the Rock and Roll Summit with Elvis, Shea Stadium, of course, them going home and writing most of the songs. They have, weight in the can, but writing most of the songs for Rubber Soul, recording Rubber Soul, the NBE Investiture, the UK tour, that TV special, The Music of Lennon and McCartney. There's so much going on at the end of the year. It's a book in itself, and she's like, yes, you do that. And I'm so glad that I did, because both books ended up being 800 pages long.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was an amazing period. And you start off with the Beatles at Shea.
Yep.
And that is, I was living in New York at the time. And when they came to New York, I remember WABC covering them getting into the hotel, into the Warwick. And I also remember the night I had my reel-to-reel tape recorder on and I was as I did often, I would tape things, especially Beatles songs. And I was taping the radio and they were playing What You're Doing. And all of a sudden they break into the song and they say, "We're live from the Warwick Hotel with the Beatles." And my mouth is like, "What?" And it was they were and they talked to all four of them live on the radio, and they gave them while they were here that time they gave them the Order of the All-American medallions.
Yes.
And I heard all that, and fortunately somebody has put that stuff on the internet. You can hear it on, I believe it's.
Wow.
And yeah, all of they have MP3s of all that, air checks of all that stuff. They have a lot of air checks of WABC, but they have a Beatles section that you can listen to, and you can actually download the stuff. There's no music; it's all talking. But with Cousin Brucey and Dan Ingram and Scotzo and all that stuff, you get to hear how the crowd was yelling, "We love you, Beatles," and all that stuff. Oh man, what a time that was! What an incredible time that was.
It was. I mean, and you were so lucky to be in New York for that because
Yeah.
way out in the boonies of Natchitoches, Louisiana. I remember we moved from Alexandria to Natchitoches in 1965, and my biggest fear, I went very tearfully thinking, is anybody in a small town going to be a Beatles fan? And the very first thing I said to people the first day at junior high school there was, "Do you know about the Beatles? Do you know about the Beatles?" Well, of course, the Beatles are universal, and
Hmm.
they were everywhere. And we had a big contingent of fans in Natchitoches, but it's not the same thing as living in New York City. Wow, you in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, I never got to see them in Shea Stadium or in Boston. We were outside Shea Stadium years later when the Pope came by, but the closest person in my family to see the Beatles was my father. And the night that they played on Ed Sullivan, he was no fan. He turned into a fan later when the Rolling Stones came along. But
Right.
anyway, he was an appliance repairman and he was in downtown Boston. And all of a sudden, he hears police sirens and this limousine drives by his truck. And guess who was in it? And he came home and told us, and we were just really, we were jealous. We were going, "What?"
I know all the people who would have given their right arm to have that happen, and he just happened to be there and wasn't even a fan.
Right, right. I don't know how much he saw them. I don't remember if he told. I remember him telling us the story, and I don't remember if he actually saw any faces, but he did. He said they did pass his truck, so he got to see the motorcade as it was happening, which
Incredible.
was really incredible. But anyway, back to 1965. There was so much going on then, and you start out in the book with the Beatles' attitude towards the press, and it seems like they were taking the press, even though some of the questions were real stupid. They weren't overly antagonistic. Am I right about that?
Yes, and in the middle of the 1964, not five, in the middle of the 1964 tour,
Hmm.
the police had decided that it was too dangerous for the Beatles to land amidst the crowds at the airport. And so they
Hmm.
started making them land in a remote location. And the Beatles absolutely despised it because why are we even doing this if we don't get to see the fans and we disappoint them and we make them cry and they
Hmm.
all night to see us and then we land? So they hated it. But I think that probably Brian somewhat agreed with it because he wanted them protected, he wanted them safe. When that happened,
Hmm.
it totally reversed the attitude of the press for the Beatles because they were also waiting with those girls. Now, as things went along, the press were notified of the remote location. But to begin with, they too were duped. They too were waiting, and the Beatles didn't land there. So they started getting very hostile with the Beatles. And the opening line of Some Forever, which is the title of the new book, is it all depended on the press. And really, it does. I mean, it still does.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard to combat the press. If they don't like you, they can paint you any way they want to.
Right.
They started asking questions at the interviews. And the Beatles, most of them were still very polite and very kind to the press and funny and amiable, and the same Beatles that they had always been. But at one point, one of the press says to the Beatles, "Why do you need all this police protection? You're a young man. You should be able to handle this." And Paul says something like, "Well, there's a lot of people actually. I really don't think we." And then George, who is super frustrated, says,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, maybe you could handle it. You're fat and we're not." Well,
Wow.
John just hangs his head. You can watch him in the video. He just drops his head because he knows that's going to be blamed on him. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, the very next day, it's John Lennon, is ugly to the press and he's rude and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
But, they were very antagonistic. They had people in there who were asking them questions about, you're really on the way out. And by 65, they're saying things to them like, "Don't you think this has gone on long enough? And the Rolling Stones are more popular than you are." And it is no longer a warm and welcoming situation with the press. And that's how the book opens. You realize that although the most outstanding things in the Beatles' career are going to happen to them in this book, they are battling their way through because the press has really turned against them.
You can see some of the comments that you present in the book. I know there was one, I seem to recall when they were talking about being dropped off away from the fans, Paul wasn't happy. They didn't like that arrangement at all.
They hated it.
Hmm.
Why, if they've worked so hard and pushed from the Casbah all the way up to being regulars at the Cavern, to being popular in England, Wales, and Scotland and Ireland, to then beginning to take over the world, why would you want to be separated from the fans? They don't want that.
Hmm.
In fact, Shea Stadium, well, John said it was his fave rave. He loved Shea Stadium, and Paul loved Shea Stadium, and George loved Shea Stadium, but Ringo did not love it. And the reason that he didn't love it is because it was so far away from the fans.
Ah.
He liked the Washington Coliseum when they came on their first visit in February of 1964. He wants up close and personal. They love the fans and they don't want to be separated from them.
Right, right. Hmm. How was John's attitude toward his career evolving at this time? Or was it really not changing at all? I mean, was he still content at being, not only the head Beatle, but just a Beatle in general? Was that still
Yes,
something he enjoyed?
he loved it. They all loved it. I think George loved it the least because George is a private person.
Hmm.
And he did not really relish you all of the push and shove and the queries and the turning his words around and the of all of them, George was the one who most wanted to stop touring. In fact, George was very much against going on the Homeland tour of 1965. He did not want to go. He said, "We're being overexposed." He said, "Everywhere I go, I see me." There are posters and pictures and cardboard cutouts, and
Hmm.
we're being overexposed. He did not want to go on that tour, but the others very much wanted to go on the tour. Paul, because Paul loves touring. I mean, Paul still loves touring,
Yeah,
and
as we can see.
he loves it. He adores it. And John always believed that the fans deserved some exposure. That,
Hmm.
for example, San Francisco, 1965, at the Cow Palace. Oh,
Hmm.
Steve, it was a mania. I mean, not only were the people climbing up on the stage, stepping on the people on the front row and climbing up on the stage. The videos, there are two videos that people can see on YouTube. They're hurting people. They're girls passed out all over the stage. They have completely taken down the 10-foot wire mesh behind the Beatles, and a man gets on stage and stands right next to Ringo. But the thing that they're doing is they are throwing folding metal chairs. And so the police say, that's it, we're stopping the concert. And John steps right up and says, absolutely not. They've waited for this concert for months. They have paid for this concert. This is their concert. We have 3 songs left to go, and we know how to knock it out and get off stage. We can do this, leave us alone. And they said, well, we're leaving the house lights up. And he said, fine, leave the house lights up, but we're not stopping this concert. And John was still very much wanting to be a Beatle, maybe not the same kind of Beatle he had been 2 years previously, but still very much a Beatle. And that is quite evident by the work that he and Paul do to put Rubber Soul together. They work and they work and they work, and they spend hours in the studio until the sun comes up. And George and Ringo right there with them, working so hard because it still really matters to them.
Everyone who has seen the Shea Stadium film remembers John's tour de force at the end on I'm Down. Was he just showing off, or did you think there was something else behind that?
Oh gosh, number one, how elated. I just can't even imagine. The concert's over. They know it's over. This is the last song of, as John told Sid Bernstein years later when they sat together at the Jimmy Cliff concert in Carnegie Hall, and he says to Sid, that night I saw the mountaintop. I mean, this is the toppermost of the bottommost. This is it. Must have been such a great feeling to think this is the last song. Go crazy. So I think he's laughing, he's having fun, he's exhilarated. He and George are giggling together. It is just a wonderful moment. Now, to your question about was he showing off, watch the footage when the Beatles are running to the stage. And Paul comes out first, and then I think George is second, and then John, and then Ringo, or maybe Ringo and George may be reversed. I can't remember. But anyway, Paul is first, John is third. Well, John sees Paul's get ready to take the stage first, and he isn't about to have that. So he runs, and John doesn't often run. He runs and gets ahead of Paul and gets up on the stage because, after all, it's his band. And he is the one that walks over and shakes hands with Ed Sullivan. I mean, he's going to assert his authority. Well, John is also going to be remembered for closing the concert. So he had some competitiveness in him, and I don't think that's wrong. I don't think it's wrong to want to be the leader Beatle and to want to make an impact. So I think there's some of that there, but is that a bad thing? I don't think so.
How were the disc jockeys treating them? They were pretty much willing to do anything to get a Beatle to talk to them or to be on their show or to play Beatles songs. If they could get a Beatles song before anybody else, they would do anything. But I mean, people like Murray the K, for example, the rivalry between WABC and WMCA in New York, it was a whole amazing situation there that was going on with trying to promote the Beatles and trying to promote your station.
Yeah, they are still very friendly with the DJs, and I do special things for them, and they're kind to them. And I don't see any antagonism between the DJs and the Beatles. And let me clarify, there are still some journalists who are incredibly polite and kind to the Beatles. Not everybody is against them. I mean, for example, Ivor Davis, who the Beatles and Me on tour,
right,
he toured with them every single day of 1964, and he's with them for the Hollywood Bowl and for San Diego, and he's one of only 2 people. Chris Hutchins and Ivor Davis are the only 2 that get to go with them to meet Elvis. And they have a great relationship. Chris Hutchins has a good relationship with them. Don Short, on and off. I mean, he is nice to their face, but sometimes cuts them behind their back. And they know that, and they're very suspicious. But not all of the press, they get along with some. It's just there is a contingent that started. It's kind of like the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl and then going to beat. Suddenly, everybody that was for you when you won the first time and then you won the second time, when you're coming back for the three-peat, they're like, ugh, I'm getting sick of those Chiefs. They win all the time, you know? I'm like, why can't you just love a winner? But people don't. After a while, they want to see them fall.
What about, I'm sure about the situation with the Toronto 1965 tape that's been discovered recently that Pierce Hemmingson has been involved with. I mean, that's, you wonder how many live tapes are out there that we haven't heard. We did hear Shea, and it's really a shame that Shea is not out, permanently. They did put the film out with the 8 days a week film, but it's gone nowhere since then. And we have the Washington 64 film and what parts of the Hollywood Bowl concert that they released, but it would be nice to get some of those other tapes out there, especially if there are really good tapes. The Japan Tokyo concert is another one, even though it's not a great show, but to hear them perform live is really something special. It really kind of widens the story a little bit. You get to hear how good they were.
Yeah, you do. And the thing is, we are so blessed to have that color footage of Shea 65, something they really were not doing ordinarily at that time. So that is amazing that they captured that. And Suba Films they were ahead of the day to get it in color. I think we will get those things, Steve. I think that eventually all of it will be released, but the goodies are being parceled out. And I'm kind of glad because we get to enjoy each one. I am a huge fan of Sometime in New York City, and I know other people aren't. I get it. But I think it was a record that was far, far, far ahead of its time. I think had it been released 5 or 8 years ago, it would have been just considered remarkable. It's highly political, highly involved with women's rights and prison reform and not being arrested for drug use. And there are all kinds of things that are so relevant. And I'm dying for them to release a box set of Sometime in New York City. Will they do that? I don't know.
Yeah, they have been digging into Lennon's archives a lot. So who knows? I was glad to see what little they put out with George Harrison, but I really wish they would dig into his archives a little more. And it's really interesting that Ringo hasn't done anything. He's never really done much of anything to go back into his archives and to dig into the vaults, which is really kind of a shame.
I think they will, but I mean, my gosh, the man was on CBS doing Friends at the Ryman, and he is still making history. So we're not at the point of retrospective with Ringo because he's still amazing us. He is still coming up with new songs that are the top of the charts.
Right. And it's amazing when you see him in concert how much energy he has now. And I marvel over the fact that there was a time when he was not in great shape. I compare him to Robert Downey Jr. And both of these guys were a mess at one time, and they have come back. They are the epitome of health, and God bless both of them for doing what they did.
I don't know how people that party hard live a long time. When we were going to Liverpool to do interviews there, we would go into, let's say, the Grapes in Matthew Street, like 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon. The pubs had just started opening. And there would be people drinking, and then we would go out and do a couple of interviews and come back around 9 or 10 that night, and the same people were there. It's not like that anymore. We're all very health conscious.
Age has a way of doing that to you. So where does the book go after Shea?
Well, of course, that's the first stop on the 1965 65 tour. And the 65 tour, I called it the perilous 1965 tour. And I thought people are going to think that's too negative, although it's the truth. So now I'm calling it the riotous 1965 tour. But
Okay.
other than probably Atlanta, which was nice and calm and they actually could be heard, almost every stop on the 65 tour was extremely dangerous. They go to Houston, the kids break free of the police, run towards the Electra 2, the Beatles plane, which is a jet plane, but it has rotors. And they run straight at those turning metal rotors. And luckily, the pilot is able to completely shut the engine off, which throws everyone inside the plane out of their seats, but it saves the lives of those kids.
Wow.
Then the climb on the plane that I don't know how they got on the wings. I have no idea, but they did. And they pulled everybody up and they're smoking next to those hot gasoline engines.
Hmm.
And 40 minutes, the Beatles and their entourage are trapped on that plane. When they finally devise a way to get them off the plane, and they're on a high lift catering cart, the kids are throwing Ronson lighters, shoes, lipstick cases, and I'm not talking plastic, I'm talking metal lipstick.
No. Hmm.
They're hitting them. Brian, Neil, Mal, and Alf Bicknell are shielding the boys. They're leaning over them, shielding them. Alf Bicknell gets hit by a Ronson lighter and almost falls backward off the cart, and Paul grabs him.
Oh my.
It's dangerous. Okay, so then they go on to San Diego. They're on a tour bus. The thing doesn't work very well. The engine stops, won't start on the field, and the kids are running pell-mell for that bus. And they're inside that bus. They're scared to death, as John Lennon said. Finally get on the road. The kids are following them in the cars, and it breaks down again. And they pull over in the parking lot of a mortuary, run as fast as they can for the limos that are following the bus. And they get one Beatle gets in one Beatle gets in another, and they peel out of there. Their lives are constantly in danger. And then we've already talked about San Francisco, which ended up, it was one of the most dangerous concerts they ever did. So 65 tour is very eventful. They come home, and John and Cynthia and Julian go to visit Mimi, who has moved to the south of England in a little bungalow overlooking the water. Beautiful. And John gets a few days of R&R, and then he and Paul are hot and heavy writing the songs for Rubber Soul. And Paul will come out and wait at Kenwood for John to get up. Why he came out early, no one will ever know. But he says in his lyrics book that John was a lazy bee, and I don't know, bee as in busy bee. He says and he was an industrious young man. But look, everybody on God's green earth knew that John Lennon stayed up working all night and slept during the day. And so why he came early, I don't know, but he does. John gets up at his usual customary time at 2. They work all afternoon into the evening writing songs. And then they're in the studio for weeks and weeks and weeks, the four of them recording Rubber Soul. That part of the book nearly killed me because, I mean, we're going to run it through a series of faders. What does that mean? I had to really study and study and study. Played piano for about 10 years, played French horn and trumpet, but man, that doesn't prepare you for accurately recording exactly what happened in that studio. And I spent almost a year and a half doing the Rubber Soul weeks.
Wow.
Trying to learn what all this meant and say it right. Had a lot of help. This was tons of help from Jerry Hammack and Bruce Spicer, and so many people who jumped in there to explain things to me and so that we could get it right. And then after that, they're off on the UK tour. And that was fun as could be, because Brian knows they don't want to go. And so he puts all of their buddies on the tour with them. Denny Lane is with them. Beryl Marsden, whom they love, from Liverpool. And I got to interview her about 6 months ago, right before I finished the book. And oh my goodness, she is delightful. And I got to learn a lot of inside stories about the UK tour. I mean, we're not even talking about the MBE. This book is jam-packed with events.
How long did it take you to do this one?
3.5 years.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And that's how long it takes.
That's how long it takes?
Yeah, to do each one of the books, it takes 3.5 years. And as my sister says, I hate John Lennon. He stole you from your family because that's all I do. That's all I do is work.
Have you got the next one lined up yet?
I've already started it.
You've started it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but my Tim Coulter, who does the formatting of the cover, of course, always does beautiful artwork that's on the cover, and
Right.
Tim Coulter formats it, and he said, "This is you. Type, 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 type. The end. Stand up. Woo! Sit down. Next title, and you begin type, 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 type on the next book, and that's pretty much how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we got a limited amount of time, I mean, there are only so many years, and I've got to finish.
Yeah. How many, I remember asking you this before. How many volumes are we talking altogether?
Well,
Have you revised what
mm,
you have you
I,
re go ahead.
I don't know. I'm starting on volume 6, and that
Right.
is to be 1966 and part of 1967. And then that would mean that volume 7 would be probably up to the end of the Beatles. And then that would leave one more to do John's solo years. Probably not going to happen that way, but I'm trying to stay at 9 if possible because I really want to do number 9, but we shall see.
Wow. So just to give a short summary, the book goes for 1965, and you go from Shea Stadium to where?
Yeah, we go to January of 1966, and
Okay.
John at this point, in late March of 1965, he and George and Cynthia and Patty Boyd were given LSD without their knowledge.
Hmm.
And at first, John was livid, and he chews George's dentist out for putting those sugar cubes in their coffee without their permission.
Dr. Robert.
But why would you do that? Why would you give someone a drug like that without telling them, And
Right.
John's furious. He's furious that Cynthia was given the drug. But the evening that follows, which is terrible for Cynthia and Patty, terrible, is amazing for John. He finally feels in control. He sees visions. LSD becomes increasingly his drug of choice. And Cynthia writes in her book extensively about the fact that it was the end of their marriage, that everything was, they had ups and downs like every other couple, but
Right.
after he's using LSD, he's becoming a different person. And by the end of 65, I got to speak with PJ Proby. He says to me, at the end of 65, John used to come over to my house and we drink and we polish off a bottle of Jack Daniels. And he said, "I know I don't do that anymore. I'm into the peace weed." And he said, "What do you mean the peace weed?" And he goes, "Marijuana." And he goes, and then it was LSD. And he goes, and that's when we quit hanging out so much because John was just a different person. The end of the book, we see John and Cynthia really beginning to have trouble. And it's not something that John's happy about. He tells you that It's Only Love is crap and that he doesn't want anyone to listen to it, that the song is no good. He can't stand it. He hates it. Sure, he does, because it's so transparent. It
Hmm.
is about how much he loves his wife and how they're fighting every night, but he still gets high when he just sees her walk by. He still loves her, but they're having problems. He's been asked by Maureen Cleave to give an interview to her about how does a Beatle live.
Hmm.
He already talked to Ringo. Now she's going to talk to him. And he thinks this is my chance to tell people who I am. This is my chance to be honest and get my voice out there and be heard. And of course, as we know at the very beginning of the next book, that's going to turn out to be a tragedy for him.
But Maureen Cleave figures in another way because he had an affair with her. Did you not?
I have absolutely no evidence of that. A lot of people have said that, but I really delved into it to see if I can find any evidence of it. Nobody, not Paul, not George, not Cynthia, not anyone says that that was true. So,
Really?
I mean, they do say that he had an affair with Sunny Drain, who is Bob Freeman's wife.
Hmm.
and that probably wrote Norwegian Wood for her because her apartment was wood paneled and she was,
Right.
and on and on and on and on. So I think that one is probably true. But Maureen Cleave, I think he loved the way he loved all of the strong women in his life, including Yoko. She's smart, she's together, she's independent, she's bold. And I think that's what he liked about her. Did he have a physical relationship with her? I can't find any proof of that.
Not to get too far ahead of the story, but then it wasn't meeting Yoko so much that broke up their marriage. That was already in the works.
It was in the works. It was in the works. And in fact, at one point, after that famous morning when Cynthia comes home and finds Yoko been sitting in the bed, and she says to John later that John didn't even bring it up. I mean, they go on and have a regular day, and he doesn't even address it. And she says, "Look, you want someone like that Yoko Ono. That's what you want. You want an artist. You always have. And I can't be that." And he says, "Oh, no, 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 no. It didn't mean anything. That was just an affair. It means nothing. I love you. I want to stay with you. And I think we should have another baby." Well, Cynthia's like, "This ain't gonna solve our problems, John." And they end up 2 weeks later, they end up separating. But I think, John, that was a horrible period for him. In fact, he says, Philip Norman quotes John as saying he almost committed suicide because he's so torn. He still loves Cynthia. They've been together 10 years. He doesn't want to lose Julian. He still very much wants that to work. But then he loves Yoko too. It was a tough time, but yeah, that is yet to come.
Yet to come, coming attractions, as they say.
Exactly.
But anyway, well, Jude, thank you very much. Good luck with this book.
We only printed 500 books this time. We've always done 1,000, but we only did 500 because our sales are primarily ebook, Kindle and all of that. And so, and it is really the best way to read these books. I understand people want to collect physical books, but all of the links at the end of the chapter in the ebook, if you just tap them, or the QR codes, if you use them, will take you directly to the press conference that you just read about. Will take you to the concert that you just read about.
I love ebooks. It's wonderful.
It is fantastic. So we only did 500. We have sold half of those, pre-sold.
Oh my gosh.
People want to pre-order, they can go to John Lennon Series, johnlennonseries.com, and pre-order it.
Good luck to you, and good luck to the series.
It's such a difficult thing, and I could absolutely not do it without the help of so many people. I mean, I have great editors, Ken Bloom and Janet Davis, and I've gotten interviews. For example, Scott McKinley, who did the audiobook of She Loves You, is like a genius. His work on that audiobook is out of this world. He found an interview that John did on the day of the MBE with French radio for me that no one had ever transcribed. I just got a team of people that are working so hard to put this together. I couldn't do it by myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, best of luck with this book, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you for all of your help on the book.
You're welcome.
Information that you gave me on Sid Bernstein for the Shea Stadium chapter, and I said it in the book, but I want to say it in person. That interview helped me so much. I mean, you and Chuck Gunderson enabled me to write that chapter on Shea, and I truly appreciate it, and I appreciate all of your support and encouragement through the years. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks to Jude Southerland Kessler for appearing on our show. Again, you can order her books at www.johnlennonseries.com. And one very, very quick note, a correction on the URL for the WABC site. It's wabcmusicradio77.com. Next is Jack Hirshhorn, who, as we said earlier, is the fourth person in the story of the recent Canada Decca tapes. He's been a little below the surface because he doesn't have the tapes anymore, but he does have an interesting story to tell. So here's Jack Hirshhorn. Hello,
Oh,
Jack.
hey, Steve, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. How are you?
Good.
I just wanted to get as many details from you.
Yeah, I can tell you my details on it, but I'll tell you one thing. What I know about the Beatles,
Hmm.
Paul Horn was my best friend for 40 years. Paul and I spent a lot of time together, and he told me, all these stories from being in Rishikesh with the Beatles. That's
Okay.
where he met him. And then I have numbers of photographs of them, really unpublished photographs from Rishikesh. And I met Paul McCartney a number of years ago. They were doing a celebration about meditation and the Maharishi in New York. It was in the Ed Sullivan Theater. And
Oh,
I got to be backstage and in the dressing rooms.
mm,
And I got to meet him. He's a
okay.
nice guy. Donovan was there.
When did you first get the tape?
I think it was around 1972. And
Hmm.
at that time, I went to London several times because I'd been licensing records that we did in Vancouver.
Hmm.
I made a deal with MAM Records, which was a big deal over there.
Hmm.
And I can't really say his name because I don't want to say the wrong name and I can't remember his name exactly.
He's not the guy that gave you the tape.
He is not from MAM. The guy from Decca did.
Oh, the guy from Okay, so the guy from MAM was not involved with the tape. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
And what was his name? Is it Jeffrey? Anyways, um, I had seen him and this producer, and then he says, "Look, this tape, why don't you see if you can put this out, like a bootleg album, you
Hmm.
know?" And I took the tape, but then I got back and I listened to it in my studio, and I was very curious to listen to it.
Hmm.
And I'm a type of person who tosses things around their mind a lot,
Right.
and I didn't feel clear with putting it out, because they weren't signed to us. It would I could get a bad name from it.
Hmm.
It wasn't something that we had real ownership over, and it wouldn't have been paying royalties to the Beatles.
Hmm.
So I just put it in our storeroom where we kept, all the recordings that were done in our studio at Canbase in Vancouver.
So just to be clear again, because you said I'm not sure exactly what you said. You said the guy from MAM gave you the tape.
No, guy
Who?
from Decca.
Oh, the guy from
He was a
okay.
producer. He produced for Decca. Producers are pretty, some of them are on staff.
He wasn't on staff.
No, I don't believe he was on staff.
Was he British or American?
He was British.
He was British. Um, is he still alive?
I don't know.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't know. Most of the people are dead. I hate
Okay.
to say it.
Would you've been hesitant about identifying him?
Even if listen, even if I dug around and found his name, I wouldn't put it out there because I don't want to disenfranchise anybody in any way.
Okay. You
Um, the guy he was a successful record producer.
okay. Um, do you know how he got a hold of it?
Uh, he was on the inside somehow.
Okay. Did he work on any well-known albums? Oh, he was.
Yeah,
You're not positive of his name, or you don't want just
I can't remember stuff from 60 years ago. And even if I did, I wouldn't put his name out there.
okay.
But I believe I did the right thing. And if anything, I would, if Paul McCartney wanted it back, I'm sure that it could find its way back to him.
You had possession of it for a long time, but you didn't think there was really anything special?
Oh, uh, Of course, it was special.
Oh.
It was special because if you take any artist who becomes a great star, hear their early works, there's a specialness to it. So you're hearing it with, it's like a baby.
Had you, I mean, you know that those tapes had been released both on bootlegs and actually on legitimate albums. Had you heard those songs before, or were they brand new to you?
I think some of it was brand new to me.
Okay.
Some of it, not all of it.
And then, so when you left Canbase, the tape stayed there, or no?
Yeah, I forgot to take it. It wasn't something that was on my mind. It
Okay.
been there for years. It's in the locker, and I just I had other things on my mind, and I don't know exactly what the route was with the tape.
Are you still involved in the record business in some way?
I get some royalties.
You do. Okay. But you're
I
not,
get that.
are you producing now, or are you?
My career changed dramatically. My involvement in the record business now is I have some dear friends who were stars like Eric Burden and John Kay, who was the voice of Steppenwolf. He's my best buddy. And I know Kenny Loggins well. I know a few of the old stars that I'm friendly with. I went on to a total career change. I actually, when I was 28 or 29, decided I wanted to go into healthcare, and I became a chiropractor. And I practiced for 20 years. And then I opened restaurants. At one time, I had 7 restaurants. Then we started a company in 2001 called The Sacred Space, which was a religious shop where we would sell deity statues. We do Buddhism. We did Christianity. We did all the major religions. I had unbelievable clients, like Oprah was my client, and Beyonce was my client. I've had a number of successes. I've been very lucky.
Wow. But you're not in the record business per se anymore, right?
I get enough royalties to buy.
Except for the royalties.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a publishing company.
Okay.
I own publishing rights on a number of things.
Are you sorry you don't have that tape anymore?
Well, maybe I should have held on to it, but you know what? In a way, this may be a really good thing for the tape. Maybe it should have come out. And maybe, Paul McCartney says, hey, I want to put it out, and he puts it out. It becomes something that many people want.
So you think it's definitely something special?
It's something special. Decca doesn't have the rights to put it out. Paul McCartney certainly would be the person to straighten it out for himself.
They, by the way, they did put out 5 tracks on the anthology series. So they have copies of those tapes.
The Beatles do.
The Beatles.
Oh, well, hopefully the right thing happens.
But you believe from hearing the tape that it's not a low generation. It's a very high quality tape, correct?
It was good quality.
Okay.
I'm actually amazed that it's still good quality. Those tapes deteriorate.
Right. That was a concern that some people on social media was whether the tape was still, was really brittle after all these years, but apparently not. Have Rob and Larry and Doug gotten a hold of you since this whole thing started?
No, I haven't talked to Rob, but I'm friendly with them. We're on real good terms.
Okay.
I think him getting the PR on it and putting it out, I think it's a good thing. And maybe it's a flashback for a lot of people who loved the early Beatles things, and maybe there's some new things that no one has ever heard, and it may bring joy to a lot of people. So yeah, I'm supportive of it getting out there, and in some weird way, I'm glad things have gone this way.
Yeah, but
And that Rob's an honest guy. He's going to do the right thing.
you're not going to get directly involved. Is that correct? Or at least there's nothing. You're not at this point on this day. You're not directly involved, and you're not making any plans to be directly involved.
I'm directly involved to this extent. If people want to talk to me, I'll talk.
Okay, but I mean, you're not involved with I mean, if they make any decisions on the tape, it's not going to involve you.
I don't think so,
Okay.
unless they want to ask me to do something, or I don't know. I don't have Paul McCartney's phone number. I mean, I've talked with Donovan, emailed with him. He probably has it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I would guess that he does.
I mean, I could, if they really reached out, I might send him an email. I don't know. Yeah, I'll tell you what, Eric Burton has good contact with them. So I might do something. I don't know.
Thank you for taking this time. I really appreciate you talking to me.
I hope I was helpful in some way.
Yes, yeah, you absolutely were.
I remember clearly putting that tape into the locker. I do.
What do you mean are you talking about a Canbase?
At Canbase.
And now tell me what you mean by that.
I remember taking the tape, and I believe I put it on the top shelf, like a third of the way across the shelf. I remember doing that.
Yeah, and I believe you said it in the New York Times story, you had ignored it for 40 years.
Yeah.
Is that right? Really?
Well, I've been out of the record business since, I don't know, 73, 74,
right,
in that time period. And,
that was it. Well,
and I loved the record business. I was very, very lucky in it. I got my first record deal when I was 19 years old. And the guys in my very first band wrote a number of hit records.
what was your first band?
Well, they were called the Motley Crew, but not this Motley. The record company thought it was too wild a name, and they would call them the Motleys.
Okay.
And their first record, The Wrecking Crew, was the band on their first record, and it was called I'll See the Light. It was not a hit, but I was living in LA at that time, and it got on the radio.
The Wrecking Crew was right on the recording?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Carol Kay and all those guys?
Played bass.
Wow.
And then Hal Blaine on drums, and had, God, what's his name? The country singer.
Glenn Campbell?
Glenn Campbell on guitar. I mean, it was the A-list. Of course, they weren't called the Wrecking Crew. They were the studio musicians.
Right.
And, I was 19 years old. I had my first deal. Valiant Records was the first label. And they had the association.
Okay.
So, the Adrisi brothers were
okay.
producers, writers. They were on staff, writers, and they wrote Never My Love by the association, which was one of the largest played records in history.
Thank you again, and best of luck in whatever you're doing.
I walk on the beach. I'm living in Mexico, in Los Cabos. I walk 2 miles on the beach every day with my wife, and we have coffee and take the jumping whales. That's what happens.
Anyway, thank you again.
Hey, Steve. Yeah, you're a nice guy. Pleasure talking to you.
Our thanks to Jack Hirshhorn. The big news of the week was the announcement of the cast of 4 relatively unknown actors to play each of the Beatles and Sam Mendes' quartet of 4 authorized biographical films of the Fab Four. This was announced at Sony's CinemaCon presentation on March 31st. The 4 films will be in theaters in April 2028, though there's no indication now of whether they'll be released all at once or separately. But given the way the Beatles have done things recently, it would seem only logical that the 4 films will have a short stop in theaters before going to streaming. But that's just a guess on our part. One other piece of news is that the Beatles anthology book is being reissued this year. It'll come out on October 14th. However, there's been no indication that anything else is coming as of yet. The book notably has the same number of pages as the original, and it's in paperback, not in hardback, and there's no Kindle version, at least not yet. So where we're going from here, nobody knows, but that's kind of an interesting little thing to keep an eye on. And we just got word that Pete Best will not be performing at Abbey Road on the River. We do not have any other details beyond that. And that's all this time. You can find our podcast at your favorite podcast place or on YouTube. And if you don't subscribe already, please do. And we would appreciate a review, hopefully a really nice one, because Google loves nice reviews. And if you subscribe, you'll get the first word of when we publish a new episode. So until next time, this is your Beatle News guy, Steve Marinucci, saying,
"Be seeing you."
Keep that one. Mark it fab.